Some characters seem to be associated with curses. Actors have been known to reject playing certain roles because they know it will end their careers. Bela Lugosi was trapped forever in the role of Count Dracula. No one, understandably, wants to play the parts of Adolf Hitler or Judas Iscariot. But there is a power connected with these roles. One role, it seems, stands out amongst the rest as a tragic and well-loved icon. However, those connected with him never recovered from playing the part. Hello, I am author and paranormal investigator Donald Allen Kirch, and this is Stranger Than Fiction.
Forget the world you know. Enter a bizarre dimension where the strange and unusual guide your imagination towards the unimaginable. Life is stranger than fiction in these true stories, where the ordinary is replaced with the extraordinary. Explore strange legends, weird myths, and odd folklore. The facts are laid before you to examine. You're invited to draw your own conclusions on these true stories of the paranormal.
Ask any grandparent what their favorite and most cherished childhood memory was, and 8 out of 10 of them would say it was watching the classic series, The Adventures of Superman. Every week, glued to their television screens, child and adult alike would watch the mysterious and sometimes fantastic adventures of a strange visitor from another planet save humanity from itself. Superman was king of the airwaves, and no one personified the famous comic strip character better than actor George Reeves. With his hands confidently resting upon his hips and flashing the camera a charitable smile, he projected everything that was good about truth, justice, and the American way. It was not as it appeared. In truth, George Reeves hated the role of Superman and wanted to get out.
Come on, let's go inside. Always
On June 16, 1959, at 1:59 a.m., Superman died. To the shock of television viewers everywhere, George Reeves was found in his upstairs bedroom with a bullet wound to his head. The initial coroner's report listed Reeves' death as an indicated suicide. After more than 5 decades, his death still remains one of Hollywood's greatest unsolved mysteries. Could this be one of the main reasons his former Benedict Canyon Drive home is still haunted?
Christ, get me out of this damn series. Dressed in light blue underwear? I look like a damn fool.
George. At your age, this is the best you could ever hope to get. What's not to like? The kids of America love you.
Too damn much, it seems. Last week, a kid almost shot me with his dad's gun, just to see if a bullet would bounce off of me. Don't they know this is all just make-believe? I was once on Gone with the Wind. I'm an actor, not a circus clown.
George Reeves grew up as George Beslow, born in Galesburg, Illinois. When his mother, Helen, divorced her husband, both moved to Pasadena, California. Years later, during his stint in the Army during the Second World War, George learned secrets about his mother that would keep them from speaking through most of the 1940s. She lied to him about his own birthday, his true father's identity, and the sad fact that his stepfather committed suicide. Reeves had been an accomplished athlete growing up, and in 1932 he entered the Golden Globes boxing competition. He did so well he earned the honor of attending the Olympics in Los Angeles. It did not take him long to hang up his boxing gloves, however, and decide to try his hand at acting. Luck seemed to be with the aspiring actor. His very first paying job was as one of the red-headed twins in love with Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. He looked well and had become a favorite on the set. Later, his roles would become larger in such classics as So Proudly We Hail, From Here to Eternity, Blood and Sand, and Samson and Delilah. With all this success, stardom was far from the man's grasp. Desperately struggling for work, George took up the challenge of playing the lead role in a new television series idea, opting him for future work should the series take off. However, at the time of production, there were no sponsors and no takers. 2 years after filming, Kellogg's decided to buy The Adventures of Superman, and George's career went up, up, and away. The success was an awakening surprise to all involved. As the success rose and the money came in, a new side of George Reeves was seen. Reeves started to get the reputation of being a ladies' man. He loved to live big, and he spent money as if it were free. Several times, the handsome actor would break the hearts of those women who worked on the set, and those closest to him stated that he was a womanizer. Rumor had it that he was involved with several prominent married women, wives of film executives. Could it have been one of these jealous husbands who had a hand in his death?
So, you think you could take off and fly away with my girl, Mr. Superman? Well, you got another thing coming.
There were signs that the Man of Steel was being targeted for a fall. Before his death, George Reeves had been involved in 3 unsolved automobile accidents, each more violent than the other, each more mysterious. The first accident involved 2 trucks parked together on a shoulder of a freeway near his home. He was almost crushed to death. The second, a speeding car, almost killed him. If it had not been for his quick reflexes, he certainly would have died. The third, and most puzzling, occurred when Reeves was driving his car down a twisting road and discovered that his brakes had given out on him. He barely survived, walking away with only minor injuries. It was later discovered that although the brake system was working, all the hydraulic fuel had been taken out of the car. For this last, the local mechanic had no explanation. He personally serviced the car earlier that week.
Hello? Is anyone there?
It was then that he started to receive death threats over the phone. Like most stars, George Reeves had an unlisted telephone number. In less than a month after his brake incident, George would receive up to 20 calls a day. Some would just hang up upon hearing him speak. Others would tell him that he would be soon walking with the dead. Some of the calls were so graphic and violent that he knew exactly who they were coming from. He soon filed a complaint with the Beverly Hills Police Department and went as far as to suspect Tony Mannix. Although the gossip columns had for years linked both George and Tony Mannix in an involved affair, theirs was not a public one. Tony was married to Eddie Mannix, the powerful vice president of Loews Theatre Incorporated and one-time executive of MGM. Tony's husband had a reputation of being a disliked and uncouth man. Most believed that it was not beyond the realms of possibilities that it was he who was threatening Reeves. Through all this drama, George Reeves' career was on a high note. Capitalizing upon his Superman fame, the man had a great deal to live for. 3 days before his death, he was offered a chance to return to the boxing ring, fighting heavyweight champion Archie Moore. The match would have been played on television, and it would have made the actor a lot of money. Who would not have wanted to watch a boxing match where the heavyweight champion of the world would fight Superman? George may have hated the role he was identified with, but he was no fool. After his television showdown, he was to marry his new fiancée, Lenore Lemon, known throughout New York City's high society as a troublemaking barfly. Reeves had planned an extensive 6-week trip, ending up in Australia. The Adventures of Superman had just premiered there and was a bigger hit than in the United States. He was to make a hell of a lot of money on personal appearances and shows, feared with eager children ready to see if a man could truly fly. What actor in any caliber of talent could refuse or not at least be excited over such an opportunity? The icing upon his already sweet cake came in the information of knowing that he was to direct a feature film upon his return from his honeymoon, a lifelong ambition of his. Several more episodes of the Superman series were planned, and syndication was looking quite good. With such lucrative roads of choices open to the man, how could one possibly believe that George Reeves willingly took his own life? As stated, it all came to an end on June 16, 1959. At or around 6 p.m., Lenore Lemon had prepared a huge dinner for herself, Reeves, and a few guests. One of those in attendance had been a writer for a local newspaper, and Lemon was hoping that the man would start a write-up on George's bout in the ring with Archie Moore. Since money had been tight, after dinner, all settled into the living room to watch a little late-night television until midnight. At that time, everyone went to bed. Although Reeves's Benedict Canyon home was known to all serious partiers as a fun and wet house, George had one unwritten rule. No one was to disturb him after he went to bed at midnight. Everyone who knew the man well knew this all-important fact. At around 1:30 a.m., friends of Lenore's came knocking upon their door wanting to party with the last son of Krypton. Reeves was not a gracious host. Upon discovering why his sleep had been interrupted, he yelled at the intruders with rage. Lenore finally calmed her soon-to-be husband down, and Reeves found himself apologizing. All were allowed into the house. A small party soon started in the living room, minus George Reeves. Reeves was seen, for the last time, pouring himself a nightcap, drinking it down suddenly, and silently heading back up to his second-story bedroom. Television's Man of Steel was dead. According to the report filed by the Beverly Hills Police Department, George Reeves, without reason or cause, simply left the company of his friends and went upstairs, impulsively committing suicide. There was an important fact missing from all of this tragedy. George Reeves loved to play practical jokes on those he did not know. Since he had been feeling somewhat guilty about yelling at his guests before, it is theorized by his friends that George wished to play a rather morbid game on everyone. George had a game where he would take a pistol, loaded with blanks, and pretend to blow his brains out. It was a well-known game of his, and for a stranger, it was a marvelous way for him to break the ice. George was also a gun expert, making damn sure that the barrel of the weapon was far enough away from his head not to cause a powder burn or damage from the weapon's discharge. Note, this could possibly explain why no powder burns were associated with George's entry wounds. It has been theorized by some that Eddie Mannix knew of this game and had the blanks in George's gun replaced with real bullets. Toni Mannix, George's old girlfriend, had been so enraged with his ending their relationship that anything could have been possible. Toni, having bought the house for George, certainly would have had a spare key to the place. The more the scene of George Reeves' death is investigated, the more one questions suicide. In accordance with the suicide game theory, as stated before, there were no powder burns found upon George's face or wounds. This means that the gun had to be a good 1.5 feet away from him at the time of the weapon's firing. Also, when his body was discovered by the police, he was resting upon his back, and the bullet's expended shell was found later under his body. People who shoot themselves generally propel forward and away from the bullet casing. Could his death have been a game turned terribly bad? All in all, the investigative powers of the police department are in question. The case was so open and shut to those involved that no fingerprints were ever taken at the scene, and no one even questioned the fact that not even George Reeves' fingerprints were found on his gun. Could the police have been pressured to close the case fast? Private detectives who found the suicide suspicious made a careful examination of the police report and noted that the bullet wound was described as irregular. So they reconstructed the bullet entry and exit. The slug had exited Reeves' head and was found lodged in the ceiling. His head, at the moment of death, would have had to have been twisted, making a self-inflicted shot improbable. It was suspected that an intruder had entered Reeves' room and that the actor had found his gun. A struggle had followed, and Reeves was shot. The intruder then escaped from the house unnoticed. While interesting, this theory does not explain why the gun, normally loaded with blanks, had a bullet in it, and how the intruder escaped from the house with other people inside it. Regardless, there is another discrepancy with the police report. It stated that Reeves had pulled the trigger of the gun with his right hand. Prior to his death, Reeves had been in a terrible auto accident as stated. His Jaguar had hit an oil slick in the Hollywood Hills and had crashed into a brick wall. Reeves later filed a personal injury claim in Los Angeles Superior Court asking for $500,000 in damages because his right hand was disabled. But just how disabled was it? If George Reeves could fight Archie Moore in an exhibition match, then surely he could have pulled the trigger on a pistol. Regardless of whether or not he killed himself, it is obvious that Reeves' death was never properly investigated. Jack Larson, who portrayed Jimmy Olsen on the Superman show, finds the Mannix theory incredible. That Eddie Mannix, who by the end of the 50s was retiring, would endanger his life in the end of his life by having something nefarious done to George is ludicrous. As a fellow typecast actor who suddenly found himself unhireable, Jack Larson said he knew the kind of pain George must have been feeling at the time. He said, "Nobody wanted me to work at all. I don't know what happened to George. I was depressed and accepted instantly that he had committed suicide." Noel Neill, who played Lois Lane on the series, had stated, "Jack and I never really tried to get anyone to reopen George's death. I'm not aware of anyone who wanted George dead. I never said I thought George was murdered. I just don't know what happened. All I know is that George always seemed happy to me, and I saw him 2 days before he died, and he was still happy then." In any case, the facts will never be known. In 1961, George Reeves' body was exhumed and cremated, destroying any other official inquiries into this matter. There is still one remaining fact about this mystery. George Reeves' home is haunted. Since his death, many have reported strange sightings and happenings at the former actor's Benedict Canyon home. Neighbors and owners alike have been victimized by strange noises, the sound of screams and gunshots, and even the presence of Reeves himself. Sometimes the ghost is seen in regular clothes, and at other times, George Reeves is seen wearing the Superman costume that made him such a television legend. It seems that even in death, George Reeves cannot escape the power of the Big S. Realtors for years had problems selling the home. Upon showing the place off, customers would be victims of tumbling sounds coming from the upstairs room where Reeves died. Investigating the scene, salesmen would discover that the room was gone through. The bedding would be removed from the bed, clothes would be scattered all over the floor, and reports of the telltale smell of gunpowder were in the air. One unfortunate owner stated that his dog would stand at the entrance to the room, constantly barking, as if seeing or sensing something the owner could not. There was even a reported case where 2 sheriffs took to staking out the house when a late-night jogger had spotted a dark figure standing upon the front lawn with his hands resting upon his hips. When asked what the intruder looked like, the jogger stated, "All I saw was a black shape. Couldn't make anything else out." One couple, after buying the home, moved out the same night after spotting the figure of George Reeves standing at the foot of their bed, looking down at them in anger, wearing his famous costume. No explanation other than the sighting was ever given as to why they abandoned the property. Recently, the site of Reeves' home had been used by a motion picture company as the backdrop to a movie made about the actor's life. Several reports from the crew, cast, and others on the set stated that they had all seen the ghost of George Reeves. Some stated that he appeared confused. Others stated that the specter was angered, as if he was still trying to enact his "do not bother me after midnight" rule. Was George Reeves murdered? Was he the victim of a vicious love triangle? Was he the unwitting victim of a terrible game gone wrong? Or was it, as some believe, the sad story of a would-be Hollywood star suddenly realizing that all his dreams, hopes, and life were nothing but a failed tragedy? In the meantime, his ghost continues to walk the halls of his mortal home. Perhaps, one dark night, George Reeves will finally be able to answer these questions himself. If you would like to see my work, go to my website at donaldallencourage.com. That's Donald Allen, A-L-L-E-N, Kirch, K-I-R-C-H.com. One word, donaldallencourage.com. My books are available in both ebook and print format and can be found on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com. It would be an honor to entertain you. So, for Stranger Than Fiction, this is Donald Allen Kirch wishing you unpleasant dreams.